Thank you.
Thank you all for joining. I am so thrilled to be joined by Deon Jones and Glenn Kaino. So I will introduce Deon and he'll take it from here. Deon is a creative talent and he's using his ever-expanding public platform and digital acumen and talents to address some of the key issues of our time. He has played key roles in the LA studio of conceptual artist Glenn Kaino, who we have here today, on a wide array of cultural shifting projects, including being associate producer for the documentary Withdrawn Arms that was executive produced by John Legend and Jesse Williams, and was selected to be included in the 2020 Tribeca Film Festival. So sad that that did not happen this year. He's a core team member in Visibility, who developed the Webby Award-winning Celebrity and Abroji. And he also contributed to the studio's long-term projects for Oprah Winfrey's own network. In addition, Deon served as global head of digital and consumer engagement at Sundial Brands, which is a Unilever company. Deon's always centered his work with intention of lifting up marginalized voices and their stories while shaping both cultural aspects and policy. Prior to moving to LA in 2016, he spent 6 years in DC, working with a number of nonprofits, the US Senate and the Obama White House, where he worked on criminal justice reform, the future of work, and President Obama's Tech Hire Initiative. Deon earned his BA in political science at the American University, where he was awarded the prestigious Harry S. Truman Scholarship. He also completed study at King's College London and was a 2013 Public Policy and International Affairs Fellow at UC Berkeley. In 2011, he became the youngest person elected to office in DC history when he won a write-in campaign for a seat on DC's Advisory Neighborhood Council, or the ANC. And he serves on the creative council at Fair Fight, an organization created by Stacey Abrams to end voter suppression and ensure fair elections. Deon?
Thanks, Liza. Really appreciate being here. First, want to thank American University, the School of Public Affairs, and Wesley Theological Seminary for gathering this conversation, particularly at this moment, a moment that is an awakening, but what I also believe is a moment of intense purpose. A moment for us, I believe, to be just as brave, where we acknowledge the role race and inequality play in our country's history and how it impacts our environments at home, in the workplace, and how we raise our children, and how it will impact decisions that we make about our own lives moving forward. Some of you may have joined this conversation because you are experiencing that awakening and need some community in which to do that, and you are hoping that we can hold you up to that light. There may be some of you here because there's a commitment to justice like that of the late civil rights hero, Reverend C.T. Vivian, who we just lost this morning at the age of 95. Reverend Vivian was a freedom rider. He was beaten in Selma trying to register people to vote. And Dr. King called him the greatest preacher who ever lived. It is he, Reverend Vivian, who said that it is in the action that we find out who we are. I believe that every struggle makes a greater struggle necessary. And with the severe inequalities and widening of economic opportunity in the midst of a global health pandemic, we find ourselves yet here again, lifting up names that brought us here. George Floyd, a father in Minnesota, Rayshard Brooks, who didn't get to celebrate his daughter's birthday in Atlanta, Breonna Taylor, an EMT in Kentucky, who was asleep when she was shot multiple times by police, Elijah McClain, a young violinist from Colorado, Ahmaud Arbery, a son of Georgia, and Nina Pop and Iyanla Dior, two Black trans women who were killed by systemic hatred that comes against intersectionally marginalized people in this country every day. There are too many names to continue, so there is indeed work to do, and there is indeed a moment for all of us to come together at this time. And so I'm honored to be able to have this conversation today with someone who helps me do that work every day. I call him my father. He's my brother. He's my friend. He's been my right hand and at my right side for the past 5 years, particularly with all of the opportunities that I've been able to experience here in LA. And in May, when, after the George Floyd murder, when I was arrested and shot in the face with a rubber bullet by the police, he was the person I called. And he's always, as I said, been by my side. So I want to take a moment to introduce our special guest today, Glenn Kaino, who's an artist with a career that spans an extraordinary range of media and creative activity. As a visual artist, he is internationally renowned as one of the leading contemporary artists of his generation. He was included in the prestigious 2004 Whitney Biennial at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York, the 12th Lion Biennial in Lyon, France, and Prospect 3 in New Orleans, among others. He's had solo exhibitions at the High Museum in Atlanta, the Andy Warhol Museum, Performer 9 in New York. He has also been included in group shows at the Museum of Contemporary Art here in Los Angeles, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Hammer Museum, and the International Film Festival, Rotterdam, among others. In 2012, he was selected by the U.S. Department of State to represent the United States in the 13th International Cairo Biennial in Cairo, Egypt. He has an upcoming major solo exhibition at Mass MoCA in North Adams, Massachusetts, opening next February. Glenn has also created various platforms for the production and dissemination of art and culture. He was a co-founder of Deep River Gallery, was a founding board member of LAX Art and the Mistake Room. He was an active member of the Harlem Museum's Artists Council, and most recently co-founded Active Cultures, the first arts institution focused on the intersection between the art and culinary worlds. He currently sits on the board of overseers at the Hammer Museum, the board of directors of Fathomers, and the board of directors of the Music Center. Glenn is also an Emmy Award-winning creative producer, more recently known for his work with OWN, the Oprah Winfrey Network. He's also the co-creator with actor and Jesse Williams of the social Appy Brogy and the hit game, which is close to my heart, Celebrity. He was formerly the EVP and Chief Creative Officer of Napster 2.0 and was head of programming and creative for Jimmy Iovine's Farm Club, the first streaming music service and multi-platform record label music show. Glenn also co-produced the record-breaking off-Broadway production In and of Itself with his performing partner Derek Delgadio and executive producer Neil Patrick Harris and director Frank Oz. One of his most recent projects has been a multi-year collaboration that Liza mentioned with Olympian and activist Tommy Smith that culminated into a feature documentary co-directed by Glenn and Afshin Shahidi and executive produced by John Legend and Jesse Williams. Glenn has been a visiting professor at USC and an assistant professor at UCLA. He went to UC Irvine for undergraduate school and UC San Diego for graduate school. And with all of that, I think he is most proud to be the dad of two beautiful girls, Sadie and Stella, and husband to his wife, Corey. He's my mentor. As I say, he's my father and my brother friend. And I think the reason why I wanted to bring him today with the intentions, because he has directed me for the past 5 years really to lead my work and lead my life with justice being the first thing on my mind. And so when I think about, when I talk about, all the things that you've done, Glenn, and when I say it in other spaces and have other audiences just, talk about you, everybody is always constantly surprised when I tell them what's not listed on paper. And I'm sure when you tell people the genesis of your discovery as an artist, they are like, "What? I like run that back." So can you share how your background and that life and death situation that you and I have always talked about helped you discover your gift? You're on mute. You're on
I
mute.
know, thank you. It's like the Zoom thing. I think that the strategy for doing Zoom talks is to write really long bios. So by the time that the bios are done, the talk's over, and you go, "Oh, the talk's done." No, hey, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Deon. Happy to have this conversation, particularly in this moment where I know not only the notions of purpose in one's career, and I think hope and sort of opportunity, are intermingled with notions of fear, and anger, and uncertainty. And so any opportunity that we have to have a discussion about this, I think, is relevant and important, at every scale. So thank you everyone for being here and convening. To that point, Deon, I think that really, there's a couple of stories that I think have been very meaningful to me, sort of in the earlier stages of my career. And then, like yourself, I've had the chance to put myself in a position as a learner to have mentors that have really given me great wisdom and great stories that I in turn have tried to pay forward in conversations with you and conversations like this. But I think some of the earlier stories that you're alluding to is just as a way of like deep background for everyone. I'm fourth generation Japanese American, born in East LA, grew up in a suburb called Cerritos. Y'all might know from an old campaign from an auto center. It was the most famous thing from that city, with a very multiculturally diverse background. Grew up in the early 80s, with a notion that the culture wars were being fought in the midst of my sort of upbringing. There was AIDS crisis, sort of zero representation of Asians, and I found myself meandering and struggling, even at that point, as I grew conscious and grew into high school, with what felt to me to be an unjust world, not knowing what that looked like, because in the small bubble of where I grew up in my family, being so hybrid, in that my parents spoke some Spanish. My grandparents lived in the neighborhood where they shot the movie Colors. This is probably an older reference, but it's a fantastic Editor James almost Don Cheadle movie about gangs and Sean Penn. I was always in the midst of cultural hybridity personally, and then I would go out and see what I saw, a world that didn't mirror what my expectations of that to be, and to that extent, I had a rough childhood, and I was kicked out of 5 high schools, and found myself in the midst of gangs and a whole slew of let's say detrimental activities. And what I did in the beginning, even at that age, and later reflected that it was a pivotal part, was to figure out how to two stories. One is shrink my own head, so to speak, and the fact that I started to create journals, and I started to really think about what mattered to me, why I was so angry, what were the things that really caused me to understand my pain. And I get emotional talking about it, every time, and even now. And what I did was I took a journal and I went back to my earliest memories, and I actually wrote down everything that I felt hurt me or made me mad, or even better, which was worse, things that I felt embarrassed by, things where I felt shame. And in this journal, not only did I write down what it was, I sort of I tried to figure out why I felt this way. And and mind you, I was a 15-year-old boy doing this, and recalling being in kindergarten or whatnot, and somehow even that ended up being a fiasco, where some other gang member guy stole my journal and shamed me for the journal. And I at that moment I was actually not ashamed of the journal, though, because that journal was about sort of recapturing that. And so fast forward, figuring out what those moments were, I ended up getting, from the really good fortune of some college counselors, getting into UC Irvine for undergraduate school. And I was, and it was at UC Irvine that I was introduced to the idea of art as a career. And what I realized was, throughout my entire upbringing as a child, I was always making things. I was making my own toys. I was, creating circumstances. I was very interested and sort of participated in sort of early sort of hip hop culture. Some kids that I grew up with ended up, my little sort of cohort of friends ended up being the 4-time champion hip hop DJs, the world famous beat junkies, and innovation and creating our own new worlds out of the pieces of what we saw as culture that we wanted to assemble. became a very meaningful activity. And then in college, I actually learned that there was a career, there was a role in society called artist, and I had no idea, that existed. And what I ended up doing was first internalizing that as just like a possibility, which as a young person, you never, you're confronted with like different lanes of ways to be. And then all of a sudden a way to be comes in and says you could be creative and sort of invent your way to be. You're like, oh, that's a unique approach. And actually after graduate school, I always tell the story when I talk about my career development. When I out of grad school at UC San Diego, the art world and the world offered me a bunch of binaries. On one hand, they said you could be an artist, but I lived in LA. I took the train to San Diego. They said you could be an artist or you could work in media, but you can't do both. And I said, why do I have to choose? Why can't I do both? And then even in the art world, they say if you choose to be an artist, you can make work that's political or you can make work that's beautiful, but you can't do both. And at that point, just post culture wars, there was a heavy investment in the discourse of beauty and, the power of what art could be. And I rejected all of that. I said, why do I have to choose? And so I ended up creating a small studio that created work that I felt was beautiful, but also political, that was intention driven, and then used that work to inspire my methodology and approach towards commercial work and commercial projects. And, in a very short period of time, I ended up getting picked up by a very influential gallery in the West Coast called Rosamund Felsen. And I ended up getting a job teaching at UCLA, and I ended up getting the job to help launch Disney.com and Fox.com, and my little studio agency were out and on fire. And I think that one of the in that time frame, the second I think really important story of that still resonates to me today was I was working with a group of older artists, and we were coming up with some bigger project, and we were pitching this a curator, a woman named Ann Pasternak, who now runs the Brooklyn Museum, but she used to, for many years, ran a fantastic organization in New York called Creative Time. And this is, I can't remember if she was at Creative Time or not, but she came to the studio and she reviewed our proposal and she passed on the, she passed on the spot. She was like, I'm not doing this. And it was not mean in any way, mean spirited. It wasn't right for them. And but on the way out of my studio, she called me aside and she whispered in my ear, she said, she pointed at the group of older artists at the table and she said, you know what, that generation, her generation, she said, my generation, we've had to invest ourselves in learning how to break things apart. And you have a skill of putting things back together. I'm not going to support this project because I'm not going to support you doing this. I want to support only you putting things back together in new ways, because we need a generation of people who can put things back together. Because before her generation was alluding to, before the criticality, of the culture wars, and before that landscape of critical sort of thinking in the cultural strata, before that there was nothing, and the new resurgence of artists of color who are working, and that entire platform was built on the backs of the generation above us, really tearing all the nuggets and pieces down. And so, that was a transformative conversation for me. And I've tried to honor that conversation, my entire career with really not only, being sensitive and responsive to criticality and deconstruction of problems, but actually offering solutions.
Yeah, and it seems like we're there again, right? Like, obviously the inequality that's been exposed via the pandemic, but within the pandemic, we see police violence is not going down and people are still being killed by the police, etc. And so in the long list of sort of achievements and collaborations that you've had, one thing that I've found consistent and sort of, we'll be driving down the street and you'll tell me a story of how you worked with somebody in this project that I didn't know about. But each story, there are these consistent words that come to my mind: justice, change, humanity, story. And so how have you kept those themes not only consistent in your work, but even obviously some of the things that we're working on for the future, but also in just sort of your personal decision making as well?
Yeah, I think that a word that there's a couple of words that are not trendy or sexy words in the art world or in the world to talk about, which are hope and utopic practice. I think people think that they're sort of naive and juvenile, but I don't discount at all, at least for me, the value of that, and I think that for me, one of the things that is the through line is I get to imagine and hope for a living. I get to think about the world. I get to bear the responsibility of all the gifts and tutelage that has been afforded to me, throughout, like you said, the relationships I've been able to have with great collaborators and colleagues. And I feel, again, from that early story with Anne to the responsibility of my entire career and practice, to have the obligation to express the ideas that we might have towards building something new. So, those are also the words that I think sort of drive it. And alongside that, the threads of intentionality are justice, equality, climate justice, and for me, the notion of, intersectionality for all those things. I'm glad now that there's just more of a discursive framework to talk about those things. But the intersectionality of justice, to me, has always been a part of what I do and what we do here in the studio. Because for us, it's really about, applying our skills as professional, people of imagination, practitioners of imagination, to really think about how we can express and inspire people to come towards way. And some of that happens in the museum space. And in the museum space, we can create very complicated, rigorous things that are also more abstract and make no sense if they were outside of that walls, because under the auspices of art, we can actually stretch the landscape of what's possible. And then in the more commercial world, we can then take those ideas and, inspire entire rethinking of conceptual systems, like we did with, streaming music or any of the other larger scale things that we've tried to do. So.
Yeah, no, and one of the things that I don't take lightly or for granted is that I have a direct, anytime access to you. And so, like, we talk every day, and particularly, not only just in my most joyful moments, but also my darkest moments. And I think one of the things that you've instilled in me is not whether I should do something or not. You never, unless you're just flat out crazy, say, no, you shouldn't do that. You give me things to think about and sort of let me make the decision. And you're not the person to come back and say, I told you so. I'm usually the person to come back, oh yeah, you were right. And so you give me things to think about, how it aligns with my character, how a decision aligns with my purpose, with the intention that I have for myself. And so where does that form of thinking, when you're giving wisdom and advice and mentorship, where does that come from?
I think that comes from, for me, nothing is, I learned early, and every day I learn more, that nothing is black or white. Nothing is yes or no. Nothing, there are no absolutes, right? And so for me, everything is about context and about the tension between the opportunity and the intention, and tension between the opportunity and the intention. And I say that because, and that's why I never answer you with a yes or no. I always say, hey, let's break it down. If we go this way and we think about it this, in this capacity, then these are causal things that may or may not happen, and these are things, and how does that align with your longer vision? And also, how does it align with the short-term vision? And vice versa. And I think that one of the things that not to blame technology or blame the world, but the way that the speed of decision making has been rushed. I think that what happens is there is a sense of urgency, which I think is false, to jump to answers in a way that are less considerate of the entirety of context. And for example, very sensitive to the fact that right now a lot of people are in general in life, as they rethink where their life positions are going to be and what their cultural station is going to be, are they like, well, there's a position of, hey, I need to pay the rent tomorrow, versus what I would love to do into the future, and like, oh, that's really nice to be able to do that, I just have immediate needs, and that's attention. there's a gap between that. And on one hand, I was very young, and this is the most brutal story about that, which was I met with a colleague friend, of mine who ran a big TV network when I was really young. I was going broke, and I had a small shop, and I needed some work, and he ran a big TV network, and I went in there and I said, I need some help. And he said, what do you need? I said, I need a job. I got to get work. Like, we're going to go out of business. And he says, this is great. Hold on. And as he was doing, he was so busy. He was taking phone calls while I'm sitting there. And he takes a call and he hangs up the phone. And he goes, okay, I got it. He goes, that phone can ring and I can make $5,000 for this network. And in my mind, I was like, oh my God, you can make $5,000 on a phone call? That's amazing. And then he goes, that phone can ring and I can make $5 million. And I was like, okay, that's even better. And he goes, you want to know what the trick is? And I said, what? He said, don't answer the $5,000 call. And that did, that sounds logical to some billionaire guy, very successful. But as a kid who was getting in a car, driving home, didn't have the rent to pay, I was like, I'll take the $5,000 call. What he wasn't understanding was my current station and the immediate need. And, it took me years to reconcile and actually understand the wisdom of what he was saying from an absolute sense, or from a big baller sense. But, for me, the kid who needed to pay the rent the next day, I was about to take that $5,000 call. And I think that, again, all of the consideration that I give to all the decision-making that we do here, that I talk to you about, that I hope through the work that we do, we can inspire people, who, and everyone here on this call, is that, to be aware and not shamed by this notion that there is a spectrum of consideration, and also that our lives happen over time, and so the decision that we know now, if we have a North Star, that decision can be consequentially positive for our North Star later on in life. And, one last little bit about how it translates into my daily life is, I'd say Oprah, in one of our conversations, said it best, and she was describing, one of her modalities of thinking and working to a bunch of her people. She said, there is no on the high road, and I'm always inspired by that, in terms of always keeping a moral high ground and sort of understanding that, there is also, while there is both short and long-term needs and decision-making context, there are both individual and macroscopic versions of that conversation as well. And the whole thing is just a series of evaluations of, what my intention is to be, and how I'm going to express that intention, throughout all these decisions. And every decision that we all make collectively contribute to the positivity of the career.
Yeah, no, that's funny. I think I've heard the story about the $5,000 phone call before, because one of the greatest lessons I've learned from you is actually you not even saying anything to me. It's actually just by watching you. So watching you refuse a lot of things that I've seen you refuse over the years. And I'm like, damn, well, I wonder why he would turn that down and not do that. And so I've learned along the way, like, sort of in some capacity, what goes into your decision of no, right? Would you say that, like, that's that sort of key that you keep up there when you decide to say no to something?
No is really hard, and no is also very empowering. And I would say, to be very candid and honest, no is something that the ability to say no is something that I have grown over only the last 5 or 10 years. Because again, when you're in that growth phase, it's very hard to say no to opportunities in a way. What I did before, now I have a chance and an opportunity to say absolutely not. I can pass on things. But before, there were different versions of no. There were, no, I won't do it like that, but I'll figure out how to do it like this, and no, I won't do it the way, you want it, because that might be bad for me or my intention. But if we do get to find the middle ground, we do that. It's funny how, when you're a baby and no is the first way that you get agency in the world, by telling your parents, like, no, I don't want to eat that. And, it's like and then you get to this point where, you get early life and you're burgeoning adult. You're like, I need to say yes to everything. And then as you get older, you kind of figure out, like, oh, maybe I have to say yes to everything. Maybe I can say no again. So I think no is definitely something that I have aspired to be able to be confident doing. And even now when I do it, sometimes when you see me confidently saying no, I'm just acting for you, so I make myself feel better inside. Because there's always an insecurity about no. You're like, maybe I should have, but it always ends up being okay. So
Yeah, no, and so we have. I want to ask you one question because I definitely want to give people on the call time to ask a couple of questions to you as well. So if you do have a question, either you can write it in the chat box, or if I know there's a way where you can raise your hand and I can and you can be unmuted by Liza, who is our technical person on the other side. So if you have a question for Glenn, we'd love to have those put in the chat box or raise your hand and you can be unmuted to get that question answered. So yeah, so we're living like in this time where, there is a lot of decision making happening, whether, I've lost my job and I lost my job, or I have one, but this is not really what really I'm aligned with, or I've had this great awakening because of all the things that's happening, and I want to make this pivot, but I want, to make an intentional decision and really something where I believe that I can sort of have an impact in what's happening now. We know that everybody can't be on the streets, but we know everybody has a role to play, and so we're living in that space. Like, how can I contribute to this racial crisis? And like I said, you're not a person to tell someone what to do. You tell people what they should consider. And so, what would you say to folks at this time who are in that space, and just looking for another path, particularly a career trajectory?
Yeah, I think that for me, the in resonating with what we just spoke about, I'd say that the biggest thing that I speak to my friends and people who have asked me that personal question about how to contribute. I think that the conversations have been like achieving equality and social justice is a marathon, not a sprint. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. This is, us working towards changing the course of history towards a more just system that will happen over many years and decades in time. And what we all need to do is grapple internally with the sense of need to immediately contribute, and then the behavior change of how the rest of our lives work are going to be to support and substantiate that change. And I think that I think a lot of people are conflicted with those two things, not understanding, because I think there's a lot of sort of guilt, not just of lack of personal action, but there's a meta layer, of social guilt of us as a collective whole not causing action, and that's causing a lot of like short-term flurry of intentionality, and which is great because it's a consciousness that's an awakening, but I would only say, as an example, for me, my North Star in life is to use every moment in every aspect of my work, if at all possible and when possible, to help further notions, either ideas from myself or ideas from other people. Sometimes I'm not the artist, sometimes the producer, sometimes not even the producer, sometimes I'm the wingman, sometimes I'm take out the trash, and I'm just the guy on the corner to help the team go. And as I'll drive a car to drop someone off, and I'll pick up the trash, and I'll do whatever it takes. And but how do we all carry through the rest of our lives and our careers this notion that we're going to be fighting for change? It's sort of like that rumored, not proven story about Kennedy and the Cape Canaveral when he goes in the bathroom and sees a cleaning person cleaning the floor, and he says, "You know what you're doing?" And the cleaning person says, "No, what am I doing?" And he points to me and says, "You're putting a man on the moon." And it's like we're all contributing together to something that is a monumental and Herculean goal of achieving equality. It just so happens to be that everyone plays their own role. So there's an immediate calibration of what I would say we can all do to help us with that short-term need to feel like we can contribute. In that capacity, there are certainly organizations that we can support. Black Lives Matter, there's Advancement Project, there's tons of teams that are out there that have the need and the ability to take in that support and that love and put that to purpose right now. Stacey Abrams, Fair Fight, we have elections coming up. We have things that we can tangibly work on so that we in our immediate frame can address and use this energy that we have to go do that. And then I think that when it comes to that word purpose, which is a loaded word, I think what we can do is really, really just transcribe that into whatever I choose to do for the rest of my career, whether I change careers or not. How is that activity, how am I going to use that and my time, to further the good? And some people do that because they take a job that is a challenging one, and they transform ethical systems inside. Some people take jobs because they have the ability to make a ton of money, and then they use that to invest in communities. There's plenty of ways that happens, in terms of translating your labor, into good, into justice, and for everyone. I think there's just their own personal equation of transforming your personal labor into justice. So.
Yes. So there's a question from the chat box that says, Glenn and Deon, what do you think the biggest needs are in social justice right now? What gaps need to be filled? Uh, you know, Glenn and I have talked about this a little bit, but one of the things that I'll just say is, this is a moment where as Glenn was just alluding to, everybody can play a part. And I think before, we were missing a lot of the comrades that we have gained and co-conspirators that we have gained in the last month and a half, where before people was like, that's not my problem. I am not a racist. I have Black friends. That doesn't happen in my community, etc. But now people are joining forces that, whether it's happening in their community or not, they are now seeing themselves as needing to be part of the fight. And so I think one of the needs that is being filled right now are all these co-conspirators, but particularly powerful co-conspirators that would have never sort of taken up this mantle before. And Glenn, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very, very good starting point. For the dialogue is getting more people into the conversation, which I think is happening. I think I don't know if I could say there's plenty of gaps in need. I think the biggest action, is in politics, in voting, and creating, a transparent context for this conversation to be had. I think the biggest challenge of diversity is that it's diverse. People who are racists are easy to spot and with each other and identify, and they just don't like anyone else. And the people who are diverse have diverse ideas. So I think the biggest gap, for that I would speak to is, when these conversations mature with all these different new allies and conspirators to make positive change, for us to have the understanding, especially that we are all going to also hear a myriad of different ideas on how to achieve, change, and there's not a single change. It has to be an embracing of a diversity of change and a diversity and plurality of storytelling. Because I think the other thing that we run the risk of is people feeling that they don't have permission to help in ways, and people having permission. And I think that there's going to be a period right now there is of anger and reaction. And I think that everyone needs to hold tight through that period of anger and reaction to make sure that we get to that next point where we can actually build upon, the wound that has just been recently even more so torn open.
Mm-hmm. Another question we have in the chat box is, can you expand on what being justice brave means to you? So I'll let you start, because you were.
Hello? Yeah.
What does justice brave mean to you?
Yeah, I think for me, I would say that courage is and brave. It's a key part that for us to hold, in the frontal notion of our consciousness as we approach any of these conversations about diversity. Because I think there is the lack and stagnation of activity, comes from the ability, the ease of being a bystander. And I think that the idea of however it manifests, for you to have in the front of your thought, the idea that you can be courageous about inserting yourself, because that's what we're here for. That's why we're sitting here on this call. That's why we wake up in the morning. We wake up in the morning to contribute to a society and make the world better for us, for our friends, and for our families. If not to do that, then what? And so that's what it means to me.
Yeah, and just of inserting yourself, I find myself not only just like in my everyday life, I'm a part of many organizations, many conversations are trying to move this needle forward towards racial equity, but like how it shows up in the workplace in some capacities, like when I'm considering opportunities, like what is the diversity numbers within that company or organization looks like, what is some of their social responsibility investments and corporate investments look like, how do they contribute or how do they contribute either to the dismantling of white supremacy or how do they contribute to the upholding of white supremacy. Those are things
Yeah.
that I think about. I think about it, and particularly I also tell my white brothers and sisters, how can you be a co-conspirator and ally in rooms that I may not even get a chance to be in, but how can you bring me into that room by inserting yourself and say, hey, there's no black people in here, or hey, there's no women in here, or hey, there's no people with disabilities in here, or hey, there's no people who identify as lesbian, gay, or trans, or gender queer, etc. And so those are ways in my everyday actions, and particularly in the workplace, regardless of what sector I'm in, that I believe that we can all show up just as brave. And the idea, Maya Angelou, portrait behind me, she says, we can, without courage, we can't practice any other virtue consistently. So we can't say we're honest or a person with integrity, etc., without having that courage piece at the top of our mind.
I have to go, guys. I apologize.
So Glenn has a hard 1:30 stop. So I'll stay on for just a few more minutes. But we just want to thank you, Glenn, for coming through.
Thank you, guys.
And blessing us with all the wisdom and advice.
Awesome. Thank you all. Appreciate you. Bye-bye.
So I'll stay on for a little bit more. It seems like we have a question for the group. I'm curious if any of the attendees are working in social justice now or interested in moving into social justice in any type of way. That is from Liza. So any attendees interested in working in social justice now or interested in moving into social justice in some way? It seems Patty may have something she wants to say. Is there anyone on here looking to figure out how they can, in their current role, have an impact in this moment? Any of the attendees? Happy to answer any and all questions as well. So if not, I just want to leave us with three things. One, I just want to commend and thank everybody for joining this call, and on a Friday, setting the intention of wanting to hear, listen, and also take action based on where we are in our country, again, dealing with the global health pandemic, as well as this crisis around policing. The second thing I want to say is that, as I said before, we all have a role to play, whether that's signing a petition, whether that's, making a phone call, whether that's, getting friends involved, whether that's being on the streets, whether that's, figuring out what your company or organization or organization are doing right now to address this moment and how you can insert yourself there. And third is voting. We're living in, I believe, the most important election of our time, particularly for the next generation. And I think that, the idea of taking this election seriously with every piece of the ballot, I think is incredibly important, from the president all the way down to the DA. in your community. I think it's super important right now. And the last thing I'll just say is that, you know, we all have the opportunity to insert ourselves. We all have the opportunity to not just say we're for, you know, we're for equality and equity, not just say that, hey, you know, use the buzz term social justice, but saying, hey, you know, in every decision that I make, you know, I'm making it with justice on my mind, and I'm leading by being just as brave. So I just want to appreciate American University, Wesley Theological Seminary, as well as the School of Public Affairs, for allowing us to have this important conversation. And thank you, everybody. Thank you, Liza, so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Deon. And please pass our thanks along to Glenn.
Um,
For everyone who's still on, you're welcome to come back on to the main link from 2 o'clock today. If there are any follow-up questions you have, anything else you'd like to discuss or ask. And if not, then please go enjoy the rest of your Friday. We will be captioning all of these videos and posting them so you can watch all of the sessions and the others that you were not able to join. We'll also be sending out a survey. So if there's anything that you'd like to share, please send us an email. In the meantime, if not, hopefully you can share your feedback on the survey. Thanks so much.